Good afternoon and good evening and good morning. Thank you so much. You have found ISSIP's Annual Discovery Summit, where we do a deep dive on a topic of interest to the ISSIP community. And our topic this year is Technology for Good. I'm Michelle Carroll. I'm Executive Director of ISSIP, and I have just a short housekeeping detail, and then I'm going to turn it over for an official welcome from our president. If everyone could please make sure your microphone stays muted. We do have 247 folks registered for today, and that could get a bit chaotic. So please do mute your microphone unless you are the speaker on screen. And second, we really do encourage you to use the chat feature. You'll find at ISSIP events that the interaction going on in the chat can be one of the best parts of the event. It's where to make comments, to ask your questions, and you'll be finding links to resources and additional information there over the course of our time together. With that, let me turn it over to ISSIP's 2023 President, Utpal Mangla of IBM.
Thank you very much, Michelle. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, team. Michelle, can you hear me okay?
I do.
Excellent. Team, warm welcome. As Michelle mentioned, I'm the ISSIP president for 2023. ISSIP exists because of our shared interest in understanding service innovation better. And let me repeat that for impact. ISSIP exists because of our shared interest in understanding service innovation better. And ISSIP provides recognition and awards for members all the way from students to retirees to share and improve knowledge related to service innovation. Thank you everyone for joining. My special thanks to Deb Stokes, who is my partner in crime and is our ISSIP Vice President. And Deb has been responsible for organizing today's Discovery Summit. I am very excited to learn from the keynote and panelists about their views on today's topic, which is Tech for Good. Everyone who has registered for the event, as Deb mentioned, or will be mentioning, will get a recording, slides, and white paper when it is ready. And team, it's not too late to add your own position statement and references to the white paper. Please take the short survey that Jim will post in the link chat. Thank you very much again, and looking forward to today's session. Back to you, Michelle.
Okay, so ISSIP is now a community of more than 1,600 people representing in 42 different countries, more than 400 entities. And today's a good example of the kind of blend of industry, academia, and NGO and government. And their logos are shown here today as an example for you. We only have 2 hours together, and it's a jam-packed session. Here's how it's going to flow. After that, welcome by Utpal, and we are beautifully on time. I'm going to share a very brief look at preliminary findings from the survey that ISSIP has fielded over the summer on the topic of Tech for Good. And we are going to keep the collection open through the end of September, which is Friday. So just a few more days. So again, you'll see that link in the chat to the survey. If you've not already completed it, please do. It should be a 5-minute process for you, and we'd love to have your additional perspective in there. I'll share what we're learning so far to kind of set the stage for today's conversation among our panelists. And then I'll turn it over to Deb Stokes, who Utpal mentioned is ISSIP's Vice President and Chair of this year's Discovery Summit. Deb will introduce our keynote speaker, who you see here is Carlotta Arthur with the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine, who will deliver a keynote on multidisciplinary by design. And then there will be opportunity there for you to ask questions of Carlotta again, through the chat there in your Zoom. So please do engage with asking questions. There should be a good 10 minutes at the end of that half-hour block. And then Deb will moderate the conversation with our power panelists of executives and amazing people from NVIDIA, UC Santa Cruz, Baskin School of Engineering, Meta, and Shift.ai. Shift5.ai, sorry, Nicole. So with that, just to share with you, we were targeting, and I guess we are now over our 51 minimum target, but we'd love to see more survey responses. With the first 47 in, we had asked, which is moving faster today, in your opinion? Technology benefits or technology harms? And it's more than 2/3 are at this point are saying technology benefits really are moving faster in the world from technology innovation. But there is, 29.8% saying it's harms that are building fastest right now, and then a tiny sliver thinking both are growing at about the same pace. When we ask which entity is responsible, in your opinion, ISSIP community, for the safety of technology innovations, an interesting thing is happening here. We've got 29.2% saying it is the innovator themselves, the person, the entity, the organization or company that has created the innovation is the one who should be responsible for the safety of it. And almost 23% say it's government that should be responsible. That 8.3% is industry consortia. And then that many slivers are an interesting array of things that seem mostly to be different ways of saying all of us are responsible. Everyone's responsible. All citizens are responsible. Every company is responsible, all government. So Deb Satterfield, who is ISSIP's lead for academic industry collaboration, has a class of hers that is going to be helping us with the coding and categorization of results and pull those open ends into categories for us. And that'll be appearing in the white paper that Utpal had mentioned. So next steps, we're going to hold that collection, as I said, open through the end of this week, which is the end of September. And we do encourage you, as now both Utpal and I are encouraging you to do, complete the survey link, please, and share your position. Question number 4 is an opportunity for you to share your position statement if you'd like it included. Share it anyway, and then note if you do not want it included in the white paper. Otherwise, we will be drawing from the survey findings, today's sharing by our speakers, and the interaction within chat, and those position statements from the survey, and also separately gleaned from ISSIP community and experts in the field over the last few months. And we will be publishing a comprehensive white paper on the topic in the 4th quarter. And the lead author, working in conjunction with ISSIP leadership on that, will be Deb Stokes, chair of today's event. So with that, let me turn it over to Deb, who will take over from here.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Utpal. I also want to recognize the contributions for creating this Discovery Summit by Michelle and Jim Spoor. And if you don't know Jim Spoor, then what rock have you been living under? Because everybody knows who Jim is. So just a thanks for all the contributions they've made. I'm Deb Stokes, the Vice President of ISSIP, and also Dell Technologies in the Office of the CTO. I'm responsible for our academic research portfolio, and I chair our internal technology exploration conference. And because everything has to have an acronym, we call that TEX. So we're going to talk about tech for good. And if you've noticed over the year, our ISSIP sessions have really been around this whole notion of tech for good. What new technologies always generate benefits that everybody is just so excited about. But underneath lying that, there's also some potential harms. And I have to share with you that everything that's been talked about and going on during 2023, this is not a new concept. This is something that if you look back 55 years ago to the movie and novel 2001 Space Odyssey, and this is where a heuristically programmed algorithmic computer, affectionately known as HAL, makes some really bad decisions and bad choices. And I'm not going to spoil the plot for anyone who hasn't seen the movie or read Arthur C. Clarke's book, but this is exactly what we are all fearing is going to happen right now. The machines will take us over. They will become intelligent. They will begin to think. They will replace all of our jobs. But I think one of the things that we want to focus on today is that we're going to talk about how can we guide the development and design to better understand and implement across emerging and disruptive technologies to ensure that benefits will outweigh the potential harms. We know that innovation happens when there's cross collaborations across traditional science and engineering boundaries and disciplines. But we also know now that better innovation occurs when there's a diversity and equity included in those discoveries. And that includes collaboration across societal and behavioral sciences. So with that, I am delighted to introduce our keynote address today. Carlotta, author, is going to be telling us more about what these multidisciplinary by design, how we can leverage diverse teams to advance innovation and equity. Carlotta is the executive director of the United States National Academy of Science, Engineering, and Medicine. I think I got all those right. And she is the executive director for the Behavioral and Social Sciences and Education Group. And with that, so Carlotta, over to you. And please feel free to add a few words of anything that you think we should know about you before you start your presentation. But over to you.
Thank you so much, Deb. Hello, everyone. As Deb shared, I'm Carlotta Arthur, Executive Director of the Division of Behavioral and Social Sciences and Education, or DBASSE. We love our acronyms at the National Academies too, at the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. It's really a pleasure to be here to have the opportunity to speak with you today. Thank you so much to ISSIP and to the Tech for Good Summit organizers. Deb, thank you, Michelle, and Jim. Thank you so much for this invitation. I'm actually a psychologist and an engineer by training. I have experience working across multiple sectors, including in industry, academia, philanthropy, and now at the National Academies. So I bring all of that experience and perspective to this topic of multidisciplinary by design, leveraging diverse teams to advance innovation and equity. And before I dive into the talk, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. The National Academies are located in Washington, D.C., and we acknowledge that the National Academies Keck Center, where my office is, and the National Academy of Sciences building. Those of you who visit Washington, D.C. might remember the Einstein statue that's quite famous. That's the National Academy of Sciences building. Those buildings are housed on the traditional lands of the Nacotchtank, Anacostan people, and Piscataway peoples, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it through generations. We honor and respect the enduring relationship that exists between these peoples and nations and this land. We thank them for their resilience in protecting this land and also aspire to uphold our responsibilities to their example. As I shared, my topic today is multidisciplinary by design, leveraging diverse teams to advance innovation and equity. If you had a chance to review my full bio, I believe it may have actually been noted there that the National Academies has a long history of collaboration across the institution. If not, I will be highlighting that today. In fact, my division, DBASSE, celebrated 60 years of social and behavioral sciences at the National Academies. Yet, many outside the institution aren't aware that the National Academies has a division of social and behavioral science and education. Not only are these disciplines increasingly central to our work, but also their inclusion is often essential to ensure that we're doing the best science and providing the best possible advice on a topic. Next slide, please. So I'll start by sharing a little bit more Actually, I think I'm sorry. Yes, we're on the right slide. During my talk today, my agenda is to share a little bit more about the National Academies and DBASSE. Then I'll provide a few key definitions to ensure that we're on the same page there. I'll spend some time talking more about what's at stake and why the inclusion of the social and behavioral sciences, diversity, equity, and inclusion matter both in terms of multidisciplinary teams, innovation, and also for Tech for Good. Then I'll touch on some of the challenges to this work, as well as a few strategies to addressing these challenges that multidisciplinary teams and diversity, equity, and inclusion might present. I'll wrap up by sharing a snapshot of some of the related and innovative work that DBASSE is or will be doing moving forward. Next slide, please. The National Academies are a private nonprofit institution that provides independent, objective analysis and advice to the nation to solve complex problems and to inform public policy decisions related to science, technology, and medicine. The National Academies are not a federal agency, nor do we receive funding directly from Congress for our work. Next slide, please. The Division of Behavioral and Social Sciences and Education, or DBASSE, is one of the 7 program divisions within the National Academies. DBASSE advances the behavioral and social sciences and their application to policy and practice, and advances evidence-based STEM education. The nature of our work is such that people are central, and that equity is often the key framework that underlies our work. DBASSE is home to 9 units, plus special projects that include, for example, the Science, Engineering, and Technology Equity Roundtable, which we are in the process of standing up, the Board on Science Education, the Board on Human Systems Integration, the Board on Behavioral, Cognitive, and Sensory Sciences. And if you're interested in learning more about the work of the National Academies, and particularly of DBASSE, I encourage you to visit our website, which is easily searchable, or to take note of this link. I understand that the slides will be shared, so you should have access to this link and the others that I'll share later. I could go on and talking more about DBASSE's entire portfolio of work, but there's a lot to learn about our work, so I would encourage you to visit our website. Thank you for that. Next slide, please. So a few definitions. When I speak about multidisciplinary approaches, these are approaches that draw on knowledge from different disciplines, and each discipline makes a contribution in an additive way. I myself am interdisciplinary in that I bring both my perspectives from engineering and psychology and social sciences to my particular perspective. But multidisciplinary approaches don't really require that. They don't require that you be an expert in the other discipline. Rather, this is an approach that draws on knowledge from different disciplines, with each discipline making a contribution. And then another definition that's really important for our conversation today is that of equity. So the National Academies Office of Diversity and Inclusion defines equity as the absence of barriers, biases, and obstacles that impede equal access, fair treatment, and opportunity for contribution by all members of the community. Next slide, please. When many people think about diversity, they first think about racial and ethnic diversity, or perhaps gender diversity. However, diversity is much broader than that. In fact, diversity can be defined as the broad spectrum of experiences, cultures, and physical attributes within a community, including but not limited to race or ancestry, national origin, religion, age, gender identity or expression, ability, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, and perspective. And increasingly in our work, geographic location, for example, rural or urban, region of the nation, et cetera, is also being discussed as an important topic in diversity and inclusion conversations. Next slide, please. So in thinking about this work, what's at stake? Why are diversity, equity, and inclusion? Why is multidisciplinarity? Why do these things matter? Why are multidisciplinary teams and consideration of these things in our science and technology work important? So as Deb mentioned, there are some very high-profile current examples of why this matters. So for example, the issue of AI. We're continuing to grapple with some of the conversations about AI, in spite of the fact that most of the people who answered the survey believe that technology for good is the primary. Right now, many of the conversations actually focus on the negative impacts of AI, for example. And I go on to speculate that this work could actually have benefited from more multidisciplinary teamwork involving the social and behavioral sciences, and could have included more deep conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion that hopefully could have preempted some of the negative conversations, or at least resulted in a more balanced conversation. Unfortunately, many of the negative conversations about the potential harms of AI are sort of drowning out some of the conversations around how this technology can be beneficial and how it can contribute to human thriving. Indeed, using an equity frame can help to ensure fair treatment, access, and opportunity, and it will broaden the demographics that must be considered, included and heard during our innovative research and development. And further, addressing equity can increase trust in science and technology. Next slide, please. Here's another example of why multidisciplinary teams matter. We're reminded of the UN Sustainable Development Goals as the 2023 UN General Assembly wraps up. So pick a goal, any goal. There isn't a single sustainable development goal that can be addressed by one discipline or even by a single sector acting on its own. Multidisciplinary teams in consideration of diversity, equity, and inclusion are critical to achieving these goals. In fact, solution to many, if not most, of our most pressing challenges are unlikely to be solved by a homogeneous or unidisciplinary team. Increasingly, the view that scientific work can't be excellent without consideration of diversity, equity, and inclusion is growing. That's the perspective that we take at the National Academies. For science and technology to be more relevant, it needs to include a broader range of people, of social and social science-related issues that need to be addressed. Diversity, equity, and inclusion should be considered as a matter of course in the work. Innovation also benefits significantly from both multidisciplinary approaches that consider ethics and social factors, for example, factors related to fair distribution of benefits and risks of new technologies. Too often, it seems that new technologies, when they're launched, the negative impacts disproportionately land on those who are already in disadvantaged positions, who face barriers and challenges in our society. So the inclusion and understanding of diverse perspectives, excellence, inclusion, all of those factors should be included at the outset. My division, the division of DBASSE, has actually been taking a really close look at multidisciplinary teams and teamwork in science for quite a while. In fact, one of the photos here is a photo of a cover of our 2015 report on team science. We're actually in the process of updating that topic and doing a new study on team science that actually launched just a short time ago. Again, all of the factors that are noted on this slide, excellence, relevance, and innovation, have implications also for economic outcomes that are associated with a new technology. Again, as I mentioned, in relation to trust in the new technology, also in terms of new channels of services, new features, new markets. All of these topics are likely of interest to the ISSIP membership. Finally, if the aim of a new technology is to benefit society, tech for good, and the aim is to improve human thriving, which I believe is the ultimate goal in much of our work, this will be positively impacted by consideration of equity and inclusion and social factors as we do this innovative work. Next slide, please. I'd like to point to another recent example of why multidisciplinary teams matter. Most of us are likely aware of the Herculean multidisciplinary effort that went into developing vaccines during the COVID-19 pandemic. Many of the day-to-day activities to prevent disease transmission, however, were social and behavioral in nature. So hand washing, mask wearing, distancing, all of these factors have social and behavioral and education components that played a key role, along with the infectious disease expertise that was brought to bear on the pandemic. Another recent National Academies report toward equitable innovation in health and medicine, a framework, points to an example of the pulse oximeter, which systematically overestimated arterial oxygen saturation among Asian, Black, and Hispanic patients as compared to white patients during the pandemic, which resulted in delayed symptom identification and delayed treatment for these patients. Further, as we continue to grapple with the aftermath of the pandemic, many of the issues that we're dealing with, such as clinician burnout, educational impacts, mental health issues, are related to social and behavioral factors. And so incorporating social and behavioral expertise in our multidisciplinary teams, as we're thinking about new innovations and technologies, can also help us think about the longer term societal impacts of the work that we're doing. Next slide, please. So why does diversity and equity in STEM matter? At the National Academies, diversity, equity, and inclusion is embedded in the enduring tenets that guide our strategic goals. These tenets include expanding with whom and how we engage and partner, designing for diversity, equity, and inclusion in all that we do, and embracing continuous innovation and learning. People often think first about the benefits of inclusion to the diverse individual. For example, equitable access to opportunities, the opportunity to contribute, and of course, fairness. I hope that I've been able to clarify in some of the previous examples how diversity, equity, and inclusion can actually benefit teams in innovation. And I'll share a bit more about this as we move forward. But this benefit also extends to institutions and then ultimately to systems. If the list that's on this slide looks familiar, it's because it's the same list: excellence, relevance, innovation, economics, and human thriving, associated with multidisciplinary teams that include the social and behavioral sciences. Next slide, please. So it stands to reason that leveraging diverse teams will also advance innovation and equity along the same lines in many ways as multidisciplinary teams. Next slide, please. So the entire time that I've been speaking with you about multidisciplinary teams, I've really been focusing more specifically on the inclusion of social and behavioral science. Why are the social and behavioral sciences specifically so important to engineering and technology? Well, you don't have to take my word for it. You can take Dr. John Anderson, who's the president of the National Academy of Engineering's word for it. He shared his thoughts on why social and behavioral science was important in his contribution to the Why Social Science blog post that I cited here. I've included a couple of quotes from Dr. Anderson here, but it boils down to the title of his blog post, which is Why Social Science? because engineering is intended to benefit society, tech for good, in other words. So after all, that's what we're talking about. Tech for good, tech for the benefit of society. So how more specifically can inclusion of the social and behavioral sciences on multidisciplinary teams be a benefit? Next slide, Pete, please. Could you click just one more time? So often I hear some colleagues in engineering and technology, for example, refer to people as users, but people aren't this. Next slide, please. People are this. People are diverse. People are complex. I've heard it said that people are messy, but I believe the individuals I've heard say it because navigating and understanding the complexity of people and society are outside of that person's scope of knowledge and expertise. But it's not outside the scope of the social and behavioral sciences. In fact, we've got this. The social and behavioral sciences take this complexity and we develop theories and approaches like this on the next slide. Next slide, please. So this is the Bronfman-Brenner ecological systems theory model. And in this model, people are embedded in nested systems that interact with each other over time. This model was actually first published in 1979. So we're looking at more than 4 decades of the use of this model in understanding people. So the individual, that user, is actually embedded in systems like families, schools, churches, for example. And then those systems are embedded in other social systems. And those systems are embedded in the larger national context. And those systems all interact with each other. And then you can also add the dimension of time. So this is the kind of thing that people in the social and behavioral sciences do. This is how we make sense of all of that complexity that was illustrated on the previous slide. And this is the kind of expertise and knowledge that we can bring to multidisciplinary teams as you're thinking about how to do your tech in a way that will benefit society, tech for good. Also note that in thinking about this model, for example, diversity is inherent in this theory. The social and behavioral sciences center people, and our work has space for diversity and for a diversity frame built into it. The social and behavioral sciences can elevate the evidence base around diversity, equity, and inclusion because the social and behavioral sciences are central to the creation of that evidence base on diversity, equity, and inclusion. So bringing the social and behavioral sciences into your work brings diversity, equity, and inclusion into your work as well, and brings frameworks that can bring that diversity, equity, and inclusion and the evidence base around it into your work. In fact, some leading edge social and behavioral scientists are already thinking about how we might leverage some of these new technologies like AI to improve our models. So instead of this, what looks like a flat sort of one-dimensional model, which is actually not, actually becomes more of something that can be interactive, for example, as we think about how these multiple systems that are nested interact with each other and how they change with the dimensions of time. Next slide, please. So how should multidisciplinary teams with social and behavioral sciences work? Well, I like to use a cooking metaphor or cooking or dining metaphor. We don't want a seat at the table as social and behavioral sciences. By the time that dish arrives at the table, it's already baked. Next slide, please. We want to be in the kitchen when the recipe is being created. Not only will this have an impact on the questions that are being asked and the problems that are intended to be solved by the technology. Next slide, please. But it can actually lead to a richer outcome. For example, instead of this hard, crusty cupcake, it can lead to this rich dessert, one of these rich desserts that you see here. Or it may actually lead to an entirely different outcome. Maybe what's needed to address this challenge isn't a cake, but actually a pie. So bringing the social and behavioral sciences into the kitchen when you're developing the recipe can not only lead to richer, deeper outcomes in terms of the richness related to societal benefits, diversity, equity, and inclusion, but you may actually come up with a different technology or a different answer to the question entirely. Next slide, please. This slide includes a couple of examples of the work that DBASSE is doing that leverages multidisciplinary teams and that will use an equity lens in our work. One example is the Climate Resilient Communities Pathway of the National Academies institution-wide Climate Crossroads Initiative. This is a cross-cutting initiative that will leverage all of the divisions across the National Academies to address issues related to climate. And not only will this be the Climate Resilient Communities Pathway will be based in the Division of Behavioral and Social Sciences and Education, but it won't only bring the social and behavioral sciences and education perspective to the work, but we will also partner across the academies, for example, with colleagues in the Division of Engineering and Physical Sciences, with the Health and Medicine Division, to bring all of these perspectives to that Climate Resilient Communities Pathway. So that's one example of work that we're doing at the National Academies that will leverage diverse teams, even within the institution, to advance innovation and equity around a really critical topic, which is climate. Another example is one that I briefly mentioned, our Science, Engineering, and Technology Equity Roundtable, which we're working to stand up right now, which will aim to identify ways to bake equity into science, engineering, and technology systems and structures. And it will be a multidisciplinary, multi-sectoral activity that DBASSE will lead in partnership with the National Academies of Engineering, the Division of Engineering and Physical Sciences, and our Diversity of Inclusion, Office of Diversity and Inclusion at the National Academy. These two activities both will aim to address the kinds of challenges that, again, can never be addressed by a single discipline or even by single sectors. And both of them, as it happens, actually map onto Sustainable Development Goals. Next slide, please. Now, I've shared a little bit about multidisciplinary teams, what some of the benefits are. Likewise, with diversity, equity, inclusion, and diverse teams, and leveraging diverse teams. What I didn't say was that any of that work would be easy. We know that there are challenges to multidisciplinary teamwork and to incorporating diversity, equity, and inclusion in teams. Fortunately, we at the National Academies have undertaken a series of reports and studies to not only identify the challenges, but also to share some evidence-based recommendations for how to address them. This is really extensive work. Each one of the reports that are illustrated here, for example, are several hundred pages long, and that they summarize the evidence base on each particular topic and share some extensive recommendations for addressing some of the challenges that are discussed. So I'll just touch on a couple of examples here, but again, I refer you to our reports for much more in-depth looks at these complex issues. So for example, challenges to team science can actually occur when a problem requires deep integration of knowledge among team participants. So clearly, individual team members who come from distinct disciplinary perspectives may have more difficulty than if everyone is coming from the same disciplinary perspective in terms of integration of knowledge. One of the reasons I shared definitions at the beginning of this talk is to ensure that when we're thinking about diversity when we're thinking about multidisciplinarity, that we're sharing the same definitions. Even something as basic as definitions of topics can be a challenge unless everyone takes the time to get on the same page. So when technical knowledge, for example, is valued above the social and behavioral science knowledge, those distinct disciplinary perspectives can be a challenge to deep integration of knowledge among team participants. Another challenge is when the goal of a multidisciplinary team is at odds with that of other teams. So for example, multidisciplinary work may actually take longer and be at odds with the team that's responsible for setting the timelines of the work of the multidisciplinary team. So if that's not taken into consideration, there can be the desire, for example, to take shortcuts and skip over some of those really critical diversity and inclusion or multidisciplinary perspectives for the sake of saving time. But some of the recommendations that we share in these reports address these challenges. So for example, in terms of the challenges that I've elevated here, some of the recommendations may include making it clear at the outset that team members have equal status and ensuring that any sort of asymmetric power differentials are addressed and removed at the outset, and that the technical team members are not, for example, in power positions over the social and behavioral science experts that are members of the team, but rather there's equal power shared amongst all members of the team. And then also stepping back and thinking about the incorporation of diversity in developing team roles can proactively address some of these challenges. Seeing the importance of diversity and inclusion to the team can ensure that all team members have clear roles and expectations that are in alignment with each other about those roles and the importance of the contributions of each team member. So again, if you're interested in some of the details about how to do multidisciplinary teamwork, how to address issues associated with diversity, equity, and inclusion in your organizations, I highly recommend these two National Academies reports that go into great depth about addressing these topics. And I mentioned before that social and behavioral scientists, when we look at these issues, we often take this really strong systems approach. And in fact, that includes sometimes the history, and this report on anti-racism, diversity, equity, and inclusion in STEM organizations actually does that, situating this work in some historical perspectives so that everyone, again, is starting thinking about these issues, starting on the same page with respect to the history of some of this work and why it's important for our work to understand that history going forward. Next slide, please. So then what's next for DBASSE? I've talked a little bit about some of the reasons why the work that we're doing in the social and behavioral sciences and education are important, not only at the National Academies, but how the work that we're doing can inform some of the work that you're doing around the contributions of multidisciplinary teams, of diversity, equity, and inclusion in the STEM sector, how you might be able to leverage some of the work that we've done to inform your work. But we're going to continue our work. We're going to continue landscaping, looking out at the field and seeing what's next and what's needed. And in doing some of that, we've identified some topics that we're moving forward with already, and some additional topics that we plan to move forward with in the near future. So I mentioned already that we are in the process of updating the team science report. That work just launched. The previous report was published in 2015, so that's been about 8 years. So we're going to be updating that work and incorporating an additional 8 years of knowledge about what we know in terms of the evidence base around team science and how to do it well. We're also hoping to do recognizing that team science doesn't always address all of the issues of multidisciplinarity. So we're planning to do a multidisciplinary teams workshop in 2024. I mentioned the Climate Resilient Communities pathway of Climate Crossroads. We're in the scoping phase right now, understanding exactly what will be incorporated into that pathway as part of our cross-institution cutting Climate Crossroads initiative. I mentioned the Science, Engineering, and Technology Equity Roundtable. As we're increasingly thinking about equity, it's clear that equity, like the social and behavioral sciences, really need to be baked in to the work that we do at the outset, not the sprinkles that are added after the product is baked, not served up kind of at the table after the work has moved forward, but really, it really needs to be integral to the work. It needs to be baked into our science, engineering, and technology systems and structures to ensure that equity is included at in all facets and at all steps of our work. And our goal is to launch this work in 2024. We're also doing work on data equity. Looking at data equity, the Division of Behavioral and Social Sciences and Education includes a strong focus on, and we actually have a committee on national statistics. And so we're going to be looking at data equity as a component of our work. Community engagement is also something that my division does really leading edge work at the national academies. And we're going to be increasingly looking at how we can engage communities in our work. And as part of that work as well, we're also thinking about the science of storytelling. How can we leverage that science to ensure that we're telling stories about how tech can be used for good, and to address issues such as trust in science by telling our stories in ways that resonate and that elevate our science to a broad range of stakeholders and to the public. Next slide, please. So this is just a list of some of the references that I mentioned during the talk. I would encourage, again, all of you who might be interested in more in-depth information that I could share in a 30-minute keynote to please go to our website. All of these references are available free of charge on our website, and you can take your time and read as much of it as you'd like. Next slide, please. And I would also just like to thank all of our team and staff at DBASSE. We have a really outstanding team. And if you would like to learn more about how you can be involved in our work, I encourage you to please reach out to me. There's my email address. That's the best way to reach me. And I hope that I hear from some of you. And I hope that you found the topics that I raised today helpful. Again, I realize that I can't possibly address everything there is to be addressed on this particular topic in 30 minutes. So I'm hoping that this is just really the beginning of a conversation, and that you found this helpful in thinking about how you might engage your own multidisciplinary teams and how you might leverage diversity, equity, and inclusion in your innovative work. Thank you.
Wow. There's so much rich information that you just gave us in a very short period of time. I don't currently see any questions in our window. We do have a few minutes that we could do some questions, but I have one that I'd like to ask. And I love cooking, but you know, sometimes, Carlotta, assembling all the ingredients, making sure you've got that special secret ingredient that you need to create this beautiful masterpiece. Isn't this similar to how do you assemble and create those multidisciplinary teams to make sure you include those behavioral sciences from the get-go, rather than, oh, wait, we've got this plan. We need to have some diversity and inclusion and equity baked in, and oh, it's already 350 degrees and it's halfway done. How doesn't that just slow us down? Don't we need to just move forward? How do you pull it in up at the beginning as part of the critical recipe?
Well, that's a really great question, Deb. Thank you for that question. That's a question that often pops up when thinking about doing multidisciplinary work, and when people think about trying to do work that addresses equity from the outset. And it's true that it can take longer, especially when you're first starting out. But in my last role in industry, I actually worked in quality control. And so like quality control, it has to be something that the organization values, right? So ensuring from the outset that like quality, it's something that's important to the institution. I know I was responsible for slowing down production on many an occasion, but it was something that the institution valued enough that it took time to address that, because it was something that the organization saw as being really critical for the work that it was producing, for the product that was being produced. So ensuring that the time to do that kind of multidisciplinary work and the time to address equity is built in, has to be an institutional, organizational, essentially a value that's held up along with the other things that the institution or organization values from the outset. So like we do at the National Academies, elevating it as one of the core principles of our work in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion ensures that we will take the time to make sure that it's baked in, or that ingredient is part of what's mixed in from the beginning, and that it doesn't end up being the sprinkles on the dish after it's all baked up.
Absolutely. Thank you. Do you have a question from the chat? Hard to believe, but there are some forces in our society that are speaking in opposition to DE&I. Do you have any experience and advice to the rest of us about how we can engage the people who are somewhat, and I can't imagine why, but they are skeptical about this topic? What do you think?
Well, I think that there are a couple of things that can be done. One, being at the National Academies, we elevate the science. We share the evidence base on why diversity, equity, and inclusion is important, not only in terms of just, again, fairness, but how it benefits our work. And increasingly, again, the perspective is based on the science that we can't do the best science without considering diversity, equity, and inclusion, that it's a necessary component of our work. If you think of it from the perspective of being innovative and competitive, having those diverse voices that bring different perspectives, different ways, different approaches to the work will enrich the work. And in terms of trying to convince those who are really skeptical, I actually find that perhaps the better approach is to identify those who have an open mind and who are willing to listen to the evidence and take that into consideration, versus those who might have their heels dug in around a certain perspective that excludes diversity and inclusion, and get the majority thinking along the same lines in terms of the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And you might find that some of those who have been really hardline skeptics, once they see their colleagues and others that they respect understanding the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion and multidisciplinarity in the work, seeing the benefits, seeing how it actually improves the work to have those perspectives represented, how you can reach a broader swath of the population, how you can significantly improve the positive impact by incorporating those perspectives. The hope is that they'll come around, but you may actually get more traction not starting with the hardliners who have their heels dug in around a particular perspective, but by identifying those who have an open mind and just need some of that science, or some who can leverage their own perspectives and their own stake to think more broadly about how these particular perspectives could actually improve the work that they're doing and have a positive impact.
Great answer. Thank you very much. Another question from chat. What are some of the metrics that you use to know that these are successful? What are the measurable outcomes that it would help us to be thinking about as we look across this whole realm of what we're talking about? So, in other words, I love the way you said this. How do you know if it worked or not?
Those are great questions. And this is sort of this is one of those short, medium, and long-term impact type of questions. How do you know it worked? Much of what we address in my division, this division of social and behavioral science and education, actually has the longer term impacts that are harder to measure in the shorter term. But you can see, for example, around some of the specific reports that are released. For example, my division actually released a report on child poverty a few years ago, and many of the recommendations were taken up by Congress. And as a result of taking up those recommendations and implementing some of those recommendations in the policy that was developed, there were significant declines in child poverty. So those are some of the impacts that we can actually point to in the shorter term. But many of the kinds of impacts that you'll see from the kind of work that we're doing are the longer term, harder to measure impacts. It's sort of the nature of the social and behavioral sciences. If you think about those systems, so think about that model that I shared where they're the nested systems, it can take time for the benefits to ripple out through each one of those systems. But ultimately, the benefits can hopefully be measured in terms of quality of life, and in terms of positive impact on society, in ways that the families, that communities, for example, measure those things, which may be different than some of the ways that us as scientists or people in the technology space might measure them.
Right. Yeah, it's always, there's so many intangible benefits that is very, very hard to measure. And I have one last question before we move into our panel conversation. How is there any active research going on in this area, in addition to what you're doing for your roundtables? Do you have any of the government research labs looking at this? Are there any academic research looking at this? Any research labs looking at this? Anything that you can share with us on what's happening from a research perspective?
So one thing I should share is that we actually do very little research at the National Academies. What we do for the most part is pull together the research that's already been done and incorporate them into these reports that for example, the ones that I mentioned. So there is research that's being done. It's being done across the nation in many academic institutions. It's being done by some of the scientific organizations, the National Science Foundation, the National Institutes of Health. They all have articulated their interest in these topics. And so you can actually identify, you can reach out to these organizations, look, for example, look up on their website what their commitment is and some of the work that's being done in these spaces. And so, yes, it's being done increasingly in multiple sectors, again, because increasingly multiple sectors are understanding and recognizing how important this work is, not only to individuals, but also to pretty much every facet of our society. And it's something that's really going to be increasingly important as we move forward as a nation to address the needs of all of the members of our society. And so thinking about tech for good, it's like good for who or for whom. And that's, the population of the nation is very diverse. And thinking about that one slide where I shared the definition of diversity. So I think it's probably more the case that you can't ignore this going forward. And I think that many people in the scientific endeavor are thinking about how to increasingly incorporate these perspectives, both multidisciplinary and diversity, equity, and inclusion in their work in meaningful ways.
What an absolutely awesome closing statement that you just did in answer to that question. Round of applause. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Really appreciate your insights and sharing. And now we're going to flip just a little bit and let's talk about the implementation of Tech for Good. I think you'll see from our panelists that are coming up, I think we have what I would call really best practices around tech for good. So with that, I'm going to ask each one of our panelists before they speak to do a quick introduction, and they have a few slides that they want to share with us to accompany their remarks. And with that, I will ask Vanita Wells from Meta to go ahead, share your screen, and let's hear from you. Very excited.
Thank you, Deb, and thank you, Carlotta, for your presentation and reminding us how important it is to bring an inclusive mindset into our everyday work. There's definitely published evidence that tells us that diverse teams create better products and that companies with diverse leadership deliver better business results. And I don't know about you all, but I want to be on a winning team. And so that's the kind of team I want to be on. My name is Vanita Wells. I lead Meta Reality Labs operations, or really my team, I think we run the business for Reality Labs at Meta. What that means is that my team manages the planning, procurement, and placement of inventory to all of our distribution centers around the world, as well as our customers. We manage customer orders all the way through to fulfillment, global logistics for all of our products, as well as all of our R&D activities, and also all the post sales operations, which includes customer support, customer experience work, as well as all of our reverse logistics and repair operations. I also lead a team that is driving the development of tools and systems that we need to run this part of Meta Reality Labs, because the work that we're doing, building VR and AR products, has a very different business model than the standard Meta social media / advertising business that supports the family of apps. So with that, I will start sharing this one. All right, so today I'm going to provide some real-life tangible examples of how VR technology is already being used for good. But first, let's level set on what exactly is virtual reality and why it's such a powerful technology. VR in some form has been around for a long time. Basically, VR is a computer-generated simulation. It's an environment that users can interact with in a way that seems real. There are basically three types of VR. It starts with non-immersive VR, such as console or gaming, computer games. These have been around for quite a long time. The user is still fully in their real world, but they interact with a computer-generated environment. Next, we have what we call semi-immersive. So this is a situation where the user is still aware of their surrounding world, but they're really heavily embedded in the environment. And the best example of this that I came up with is a flight simulator. I know I've had the experience of actually using a flight simulator back in the old days. And so that was, in effect, I think, my first exposure to virtual reality. But what we're going to talk about today is really what we call fully immersive virtual reality. This is the most realistic simulation experience. It's complete with sight and sound and sometimes touch or haptic feedback as well. And generally, it requires a head-mounted display in order to experience. So before I came to Reality Labs, or Oculus, as it was known at the time, I really had no idea about this technology or how it could be used. It's fair to say that I was pretty skeptical of VR itself, as well as how, I, who built a career in high-tech hardware, would fit in at Facebook, as the company was known then, which is a social media advertising company. All of that changed when I experienced VR firsthand. It was a demo experience called Toy Box, where I was in VR with another person and we interacted with virtual toys, such as, rolling a dump truck or tossing balls back and forth. And at the end of the demo, I was playing ping pong in VR with the other person. Now, they were actually in the other room right next door to me, but I realized that that person could have been anywhere in the world, and we were engaged in this game. And I realized I was getting really competitive. I felt immersed in that world, and it felt just like I was experiencing the competition in real life. That's what we call a sense of presence, which I think is one of VR's magic powers. I was interacting with and manipulating the virtual items of the objects in the virtual world. That's agency. And that competitive feeling was an emotive response, which I think is another superpower of VR. Although there are many examples, I'm going to focus on the use of VR in health, training and education, and in bringing humankind closer together. First of all, let's talk about health and fitness. So this clip shows people playing Supernatural, which is one of the most popular applications for both fun and fitness. We have a lot of testimonials from people who are using VR as a gym, especially for cardio workouts. The cardiovascular effects of exercising in VR are really just the same as any other exercise. And if it's fun and engaging, such as including a personal trainer or introducing competition, people are more likely to stick with it. And then they will realize more positive effects. A very different kind of application for VR is to use it for pain management. This example is about helping remove the perception of pain from people receiving some very painful treatments that are required for burn victims. So there are several techniques for distracting the mind, because remember, pain is in the mind. Regardless of where it originates, it's in the mind is where we actually perceive it. And there are several techniques for distracting the mind during painful experiences to reduce that perception. Thankfully, I haven't experienced it, but I've read that regular skin cleaning and abrasion required for burn treatment can be extremely painful. And when patients experience the pain, they're more anxious the next time that the treatment is required, which causes the mind to think even more about the anticipated pain. This study from the University of Washington showed that exposing children to VR during these treatments significantly reduces the patient's perception of pain and lowered the anxiety level. And after reviewing 10 studies about using VR as a pain management tool, the National Institute of Health concluded that this can be effective in significantly reducing the perception of pain of burn victims. And presumably that would be effective for other painful treatments as well. The next area is really with respect to well-being or mental health. And VR is also being used in this area. There are VR apps for meditation, for example, that can be effective in lowering levels of stress and anxiety, which really helps to manage the mental health and high blood pressure for a lot of people. In controlled settings, VR can be used to treat mental health conditions such as phobias by exposing patients to their fears in what's really a safe environment. Because of the strong sense of presence and emotive response evoked by VR, you really do feel like you're there. I remember being in VR on a very tall structure, and I could feel my own fear of heights coming through. So again, leveraging some of the superpowers of VR can be used in so many ways for general health and fitness. So there's also been a lot of headlines lately regarding the use of VR in training and education. These are all headlines. I took 5 minutes. I just clipped them and put them here. And you can see that it's a pretty hot topic right now in this world. And also several companies have been established to actually develop VR training and curriculum. So why does it work? There's several reasons why VR is an effective medium for learning. And most of these are related to the superpowers that I noted earlier. Without external distractions, students are more focused on the material. Adding a physical component to the training which is agency, that aids in memory and recall. And unlike many real-world locations, VR simulations are physically safe, which allows for practice of a dangerous task in a safe environment. One of the first to demonstrate the efficacy of training in VR was Johnson & Johnson Institute. Here you see surgeons being trained on arthroscopic knee surgery, and the results were astounding. Surgeons who received VR training demonstrated proficiency in far less time than those who only received traditional training. This next example from Duke Energy, Duke uses VR to train natural gas power plant technicians on inspection and maintenance procedures. Imagine a technician learning to, say, not necessarily for Duke, but with your police department, learning to defuse a bomb in a safe environment, or a police officer learning how to defuse a hostage situation. That leads into really one of the next areas, which is the development of soft skills. This example is from PwC. They have been using VR simulations as part of their DEI curriculum for leaders. Walking a mile in the shoes of an individual allows you to see someone else's world. You can see what they're seeing, you can hear what they're thinking, and that really helps to equip leaders to value diverse perspectives and become more inclusive leaders. And then finally, in this section, there's the use of VR in university and high school settings. Morehouse College, for example, found that using VR to teach students a variety of subjects was more effective than classroom teaching. And they found that they were more engaged, and they, at the end of the course, had a higher score than their peers who did not use VR. I often imagine a high school biology class, where students can travel through the body to learn about anatomy and how various organs work. Imagine dissecting an animal heart in VR, and imagine how making this available to students can improve learning outcomes. The final kind of VR for good application that I'm going to talk about today leverages VR's ability to make you feel you are somewhere when you aren't actually there. The first one is around, this is a walkthrough of a refugee camp. Now, this is actually a 2D depiction. When you're actually in 3D and you can navigate this in 2D like you've all seen for movies and whatever that are filmed in 3D. But when you're in the headset and you're looking around and you see the people and you see the conditions, it really has a much more emotive response. Specifically, it allows you to understand the actual suffering, the human suffering, that people are experiencing. And there are a lot of examples of these 360 videos that you can view in VR. This particular one is a Syrian refugee camp, but you can find many of these documentaries that are depicting the life of refugees in South Sudan, in Greece, in Thailand, and many other places where large populations have been displaced. And then finally, for me, this is actually one of my favorites. This film it's called Traveling While Black. It is set in the Jim Crow era. It's a reenactment of what it was like for Black people to travel throughout the United States during this era. And as you can see in the quote below, this experiential film is really about empathy. It harnesses VR's superpowers of presence and empathy to help the viewer appreciate everything that Black travelers had to navigate for a simple trip, say, to visit your relatives for a holiday. Which restaurants would serve you, what neighborhoods to avoid, where to find safe and welcoming lodgings. Many of us have a hard time appreciating others' experiences, and films like Traveling While Black provide a path to open doors of understanding. Thank you for having me. And I hope to see you someday in VR.
Well, we're almost there now. We're at least virtual part of it, but not necessarily the reality part of it. But thank you, Vanetta. That was wonderful. I'd like to turn it over to Dr. David Lee. Please go ahead, share your screen, and tell us a little bit about yourself, and then just jump right into what you have to tell us today, David.
Wonderful. Let me just share my screen, set up my slides. Well, both of the talks so far have been amazing. I'm so excited to be here to be part of this conversation. My name is David. I did my PhD at Stanford, where I worked with governments on engaging community members in participatory democracy initiatives. That's kind of where I started this journey on Tech for Good. And now I'm a faculty at UC Santa Cruz, where I run the Tech for Good lab. What I wanted to bring to this conversation today is how education can integrate with work and community engagement with industry and civil society to strengthen the development of technology for good. I want to start with a quote from my advisor from my time at Stanford. He said, "Algorithms used to be what made computers run faster. Now they create social and economic systems." And it's true. If you think about it, computing has transformed our social interactions, how we buy things, political discourse and activism, how we find housing, transportation, work, our financial system. We could go on and on. We're in a world where our technological and social or societal systems are inseparable. The internet creates a global network for technology-facilitated interaction. Our devices allow us to tap into this network and for that network to tap into us. And the cloud and API economy means that innovations are rapidly and continuously being introduced into these interactions that affect every part of our society. So if we want to guide development of technology for good, we need to educate public-minded innovators that can design to both technological and societal system-level concerns in its innovations. But we're not just in a socio-technical world, we're also in a whitewater world. John C. Brown describes 3 different eras that require different ways of living, working, and learning. He said when he was growing up, his father told him, well, think of yourself, your career, like a steamship. Set a course for your life and power through any obstacles that get in your way. But he found that his career was more like a sailboat. Play with the wind, adjust to the natural forces of change to get to where you want to be. Well, now we're entering an age where living, working, and learning, it's more like whitewater kayaking. You're constantly being buffeted by new rapids, and we as individuals and as communities have to continually adjust and learn and adapt to navigate our way through. So we not only need public-minded innovators that can design to social and technological concerns, we also need new models of continuous learning and collaboration that enable individuals and communities to adapt to change. This is one of the things we think about in Tech for Good. And how do we build student programs? How do we build digital platforms that support students in growing into their full career identity and capacity amidst change? And that grow in leaders that can contribute to communities and organizations learning to navigate a whitewater socio-technical world. In my research lab, we have over 100 undergraduate students involved each quarter. And most of them join without any prior background. So let's say they're interested in web development. They don't have prior experience, but they want to learn that. So we add them to an introductory web development team. And these students are learning user research, design, web development, machine learning in the context of making real contributions to advancing social computing research on education work and community engagement. I want to share some of the projects they've worked on that will act to both illustrate the great work they're doing while they're learning, and that also themselves capture some of the ideas we have or potential new models for learning. One of the earliest projects we worked on was a platform called Causeway. It's a platform designed for learning web development. And the big idea in the platform was to organize learning around what we call micro roles. Instead of going through a sequence of topical modules like HTML, then CSS, then JavaScript, each module in our platform instead corresponds to these micro roles that are the building blocks of both the learning pathways as well as building blocks for organizational structures that coordinate project contributions. So someone new might be an elements developer or a layout developer, working on a single component that's part of a larger page managed by a more experienced page manager. We found that people with little to no past experience in HTML and CSS really enjoyed it. And this is just a proof of concept, but they were able to complete static views of a web application as they were learning. And they said the ability to learn the concepts in such a way that they are applied quickly, then practiced on pages for real-world use is rewarding and makes the material stick better. This was how we started to think about organizational structures that center learning and that connect learning with real-world contributions. It's one of the ideas that make our lab possible with 100 plus undergraduate students. And we've also used it in a course-based community consultancy program that we've been developing. In my business strategy and information systems course, I organized the entire class of 100 plus students around a single large strategic assessment and design exploration project for nonprofits. Students survey and interview dozens of the organization's staff, leaders, volunteers, and clients to understand internal perspectives on the organization's strategic position, its core values, its strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats, as well as external perspectives on client journeys from discovering the organization to experiencing its services and re-engaging. Finally, students brainstorm ideas for using digital tools to support the organization, and then split up into smaller teams to implement or prototype various ideas. Some use existing tools to provide immediate value, and others prototype concepts for new apps. So there's this diverse portfolio of projects that allow us to support student learning and creativity, while also ensuring that students are delivering at least some projects that have immediate value for our nonprofit partners. To make this all work, we organize the course after the workplace as an organization. So if you take just the first phase, the landscape analysis, we structure that by dividing up the course into 8 divisions, each delivering its own independent report, with 3 teams focused on understanding either the organization's values, its strengths and weaknesses, or its opportunities and threats. In the first week, everyone jumps in by learning thematic analysis, in which they analyze a few existing interviews that I've already conducted. And then in the second week, people are actually assigned to different roles, different homework assignments. Some people practice static analysis again on new interviews, but people who did well in the first assignment can help conduct new interviews, or they can be one of the team leads working on synthesizing a divisional report with the leads from the other 2 teams in their division. And then finally, the leads in the top divisions, they finalize and present the final report. This process of learning thematic analysis is further supported by one of the platforms, Anota, that students have built in Tech for Good. It's a platform where students can read and annotate transcripts towards defining themes that answer the given research questions. And the big idea of the platform is, well, how do we turn large classes into an advantage rather than a disadvantage? In a big class, it's not possible for staff to engage in in-depth discussions and feedback with each student, but you do have many students that are all analyzing the same interviews. So could we leverage that? And so what we do is after students submit their initial annotations, Anoda will run an algorithm that predicts which parts of the transcripts are relevant and use this to provide personalized hints to students for further reflection. What we found is that even though only 25% of students identify a particular relevant sentence on average, after just around 20 students, the algorithm has an accuracy of 75% that far exceeds the best students. So this is just a small example of organizational structures augmented by AI, linking learning with advancing real projects. This thematic analysis process we've been talking about happens in just the first few weeks of one class. But you can imagine, what if an entire degree program were structured in this way, where students were learning business strategy and information systems, human-centered design research, web and mobile app programming, all contributing towards experiential community-engaged projects as they learn? And what if past cohorts return in leadership classes where they take on managerial roles across the entire process? Heather McGowan says, in the past, we learned in order to work. Now, in a whitewater world, we need to be engaged in work in order to continuously learn. And in a socio-technical world, we need engaged students and workers in the complex social, community, societal context that technology will increasingly be integrated into. I want to conclude by saying that the ISSIP community has a really unique opportunity and position to think about new models for collaborative programs across industry, academia, government, and civil society that provide students with rich learning experiences and development, communities with innovation and engaged constituents, and industry with talent, innovative research, and impact in their communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David. There are a couple of questions in the chat, but I think we'll hold them until the end of everyone's presentation. So let's turn it over to Renee Yao from NVIDIA. And again, brief intro and just jump right into your presentation, Renee. Thank you.
Sounds great. Can you guys see my screen okay? Yes, all right. Hi, everyone, great to be here today. I lead ecosystem business development for healthcare life science. First thing first is to level set on who NVIDIA is. NVIDIA, as a company, we pioneer accelerated computing, and our ecosystems span about 4 million developers, 400,000 companies, and over 3,000 applications. Many people who thought that maybe we are a chip company is only looking at a small circle at the bottom left, whereas we actually built many different types of hardware with software, system software, accelerated libraries, application framework across many different industries, including healthcare, climate change, retail, oil and gas, manufacturing, self-driving car, robotics, AI cities, and more. My day-to-day job is working in the healthcare life science space, and NVIDIA supercharges healthcare life sciences from medical imaging to drug discovery, genomics to patient monitoring. And many of the researchers uses our traditional simulation and AI to solve the next grand challenges. The most recent hype is generative AI, large language models, and similar techniques are being used to transform the pharmaceutical industry to discover disease targets, design novel molecules, and protein-based drugs with our solutions called BioNeMo to help find the next drug candidates and speed up what usually would have taken 5 years for the early discovery phase down to a couple days or maybe even hours. Recently, we also broke the world record with researchers from Stanford for DNA sequencing, be able to turn back results within 5 hours and 2 minutes to reach a genetic disorder diagnosis within the same day for critical care patients. From the software-defined medical devices perspective, we are also pioneering a lot of accelerated computing with Holoscan and IGX to help speed up any of the real-time streaming solution at the edge right here. And some of the use cases that you can see here is, for example, using augmented reality overlay of a patient anatomy from a CT scan, rendering in real time and augmented reality. And we can help surgeons actually be able to see patients' vascular and tissue structure a lot clearer and be able to make real-time decisions and train younger surgeons on how to perform surgeries better. Besides in the healthcare space, we're also doing a lot in the climate tech world. And in that space, one of our key initiatives is Earth 2, which is a digital twin of the Earth. And we hoped the simulation of the world, we be able to help predict the complex multi-physics of Earth, atmosphere, land, sea, and ice caps at significant high resolution to be able to help us better predict the regional impact of human action. One of the demos that we recently saw is in the next couple of years, there will be a few degrees increase in temperature in India that will cause 30% decrease in crop. And that has resulted in regional policy changes on import and export of crop for their local citizens. Of course, besides many of the different AI for good use cases at NVIDIA that we are pioneering, we're also working with ecosystem partners that are in either small startups stages or larger companies as well. Inception is actually one of our startup programs for 15,000 startups worldwide across 100 countries. And last year, our growth was about 40%. And in our Inception program, we're working with startups in AI, deep learning, AR, VR, gaming, networking, and graphics. We help them with innovating their solutions, building and growing with them. A lot of the startups leverage our NVIDIA Deep Learning Institute to take classes and leverage many of the AI technical expertise to speed up their training and development of their AI solutions. And if they do decide to build and buy, they can have preferred pricing on both software and hardware. And when they're ready to go, we have go-to-market solutions, marketing, and also 700 VCs in our VC Alliance. And now let's take a look at some specific examples from our Inception program. This company is called Evozyme. They are using generative AI for novel protein design. They can design novel, adapted, and high-performance proteins to solve long-standing challenges in therapeutics and drug discovery and sustainability in climate change. They were able to come up with 165 mutations for disease mutations within just a few days to help with many rare diseases. DeepScribe is a company that helps solve physician burnout by automatically document a lot of the charts. So 40% of the clinical workdays today is actually spent on documentation, and 60% of physician burnout actually came from administrative tasks. So Scribe is able to use GPU-accelerated AI solution to help close charts in less than 2 minutes and reduce documentation by 75%. And that is actually an additional 2 patients per day. For those who may be familiar with the oncology space, a doctor tends to see about 25 to 30 patients a day. And sometimes for a patient who got diagnosed with cancer, from day 1, maybe down to getting the actual treatment, it can actually take them 6 months to get treatment. So anything in between that process that we can help automate using technology and AI is definitely contributing to better patient care. Another company called Artisight, they are based in Chicago, US, and for them, they help with operational efficiency in the hospitals. What you're seeing here on the screen is they're able to detect the beginning and the ending of a surgery to help optimize number of surgeries that they can schedule with AI-powered camera solutions. And they can also automatically detect temperature and use body pose estimation to figure out when the patient is trying to get out of bed to prevent patient falls. And since their launch, they're able to actually deploy across 2,000 hospitals and help report back a 16x return on investment for the hospital. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, they were able to reduce the nurses' need to enter into very infectious rooms by 3 to 6x, and also able to reduce patient falls by close to 80%. Another company, Viz AI, is solving a challenge in stroke, which is one of the leading causes of disability. Just a few minutes delay, you can be forever actually paralyzed. So Viz AI were able to automatically analyze CT images and send the results through mobile phones, coordinating a lot of care through multiple different players in this stroke care continuum within just minutes. HeartFlow, a company that's helping with heart disease, which is a world's biggest killer in the space. And they are able to help leveraging some of the CT scan and computational fluid dynamic to actually put together a very personalized 3D model of patients' arteries and help analyze impact of blockage. And they were able to help reduce the unnecessary invasive angiogram by 83% and reduce the healthcare system cost by 26%. Knoll is a Korea-based company. They put together a digital microscopy platform to help solve the shortage of pathologies around the world. 2/3 of the world's pathologists actually only distributed across 10 countries. So for them, they have this software-defined medical instruments called MeLab, which you only need minimum blood drawn from your fingertips to be able to diagnose malaria and blood cell morphology. One of my personal favorite is Oxford Nanopore. They are a company that's produced these palm-sized gene sequencers, and they essentially can help identify the DNA and RNA sequencing of anything biologic. And using GPU-accelerated AI, they're able to help immediately diagnose the devastating plant diseases in Africa to help with plant yield and saving lives, and also on-site testing for viruses such as Zika disease to help prevent the spread of infectious disease. We consider anything that is software defined in an instruments, devices that in the future can be autonomous robots. So many of the robotics across industries such as manufacturing to agriculture to securities to home-based healthcare are listed on this slide here. As you can see, many of the AI and tech for good are being implemented across many different industries. I am very proud to be working for a company, NVIDIA, that's considered as one of the best places to work and one of the smartest company on earth. And I hope many of the students in the audience here can consider NVIDIA as one of your employers in the future and do your life's work with NVIDIA or with NVIDIA's ecosystem. We currently have about 16,000 generative AI companies built their solutions on top of NVIDIA. And we're very proud to be solving world's some of the toughest challenges within the company and in our ecosystem. And if you enjoyed hearing some of the use cases, you can see actually a lot of the solutions live with us at our GTC conference in person next year, March 18, in San Jose Convention Center. And for those who may want to get started in AI and deep learning, we also will be hosting a lot of the boot camps and Deep Learning Institute classes on site too. So I hope to see many of you guys there and continue AI and tech for good journey with us. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. And yes, indeed, it is great to be a part of a company that's doing so many advancements in this space right now. Moving on to our next panelist, Nicole, I just have to personally say it is so delightful to share a stage with you again. It's been way too long. So over to you for your remarks and presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. And as always, I'm so excited to see everything everybody is doing here. It's amazing and exciting. For those of you I haven't met yet, my name is Nicole Reinecke. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for Shift5 AI, and we're building and training cutting-edge AI solutions to solve a lot of critical tech domains. Prior to starting this company, I was a Senior Vice President of Innovation for Iron Mountain, and prior to that, I was a Senior Distinguished Engineer at Dell Technologies. I'm also an inventor with about 100 pending and granted patents. I lost track. And I'm the co-author with Hannah Yehuda and Deborah Slapik of the book called Compassion-Driven Innovation. And that's really what I want to talk to you about today, because it's all about how do you blend agile design thinking and user experience and research into moving technology forward for the best for everybody involved. So I'm going to share with you some of the real world process and then walk you through some examples that we've implemented over the past 6 months. If we could move forward. So UX, or user experience design, has this incredible concept and way of thinking about helping people to create sustainable and right focus. That you have to do more than just care about somebody, right? Because that's what sympathy is. So you get a glimpse of understanding and you care about someone suffering, that's sympathy. And then the next thing that happens is when you start to go into design thinking or using other methods, they really encourage empathizing with the user. And empathy is when you feel for someone's suffering and you kind of want to stop it, right? But that's not far enough, because what that does is it forgets everything that's happening around the person who you're trying to help. What you really need is compassion. And compassion is an understanding of the situation and an understanding of all the surrounding components in a depth where you want to and can identify how to relieve the suffering that's happening for everyone involved in the situation. If we could click forward. The way you do that is through a really deep understanding of who is involved in the situation, the impact that's being had on the situation. And this is where it sort of starts to diverge. The existing journeys for everybody involved across an environment or across a situation. And then, most importantly, where your goals and capabilities as a human and as a company intersect with the needs of the people. This is a really important concept. If we move forward, so what we did as a set of co-authors and as co-workers, because at the time we were all at Dell Technologies, is we identified a way to build and repeat systematic compassion. It sounds a little bit overwhelming. It sounds a little callous. It is not. This actually really works. And the reason it works is because it's all hinged on storytelling. One of the most effective ways to understand people and to understand what's going on in an environment is to display a deep empathy and compassion for people in impact. And you can't do that with glossy slides. You really need to do it with immersive research and storytelling. Can you move forward, please? And so you can break that down. I know this is small, but it's going to seem really obvious in just a second, with just 5 storytelling techniques. And you do these in order to create true systematic implementation that's repeatable and that actually ensures you're doing something good for everybody involved in what you're trying to build. You want to make sure you have what's called a relationship map. So how do you know who you're trying to sell to or who you're trying to help? Who are the people who are influential in that environment? List all of those people. And then who are the possible people impacted? What are the ramifications of any kind of change that are happening? So this is a relationship map. And you can do this in just a few minutes. What do you understand about the situation? Who's involved? I actually really have started to use generative AI deeply when I'm going through this process. So I will go and sit down and say, here's the situation I'm thinking about. Create a list of 50 people who are either the people who are affected, the people who could influence it, or the people who are impacted by it. The next thing that you're going to do is you're going to create what's called a prototype journey map. What do you think happens in 10 to 20 steps between when the person starts to think about the issue at hand to when the issue at hand comes into play, all the way through what happens at the end of the day or the end of this cycle? This is what you think happens. This is your journey map. The next thing you're going to do, this third thing over here, is you're going to create a list of all of your assumptions that it took for you to make that map. You're going to question everything. So here's why you do it. In this situation right here, this is a company called Innovation Africa. Innovation Africa is an organization that has helped millions of people get access to clean water. That is not where they started. Where they started was the woman who founded it is this incredible woman. And she said, I was in Africa and I noticed children weren't receiving education. I want to help children go to school. So what she saw initially was that the children weren't in school and it was dark and they didn't have access to electricity in these buildings. So she took what she thought was her knowledge, which is she had a deep understanding of solar electricity and electricity generation, and she started putting electricity in buildings, in villages in Africa. That actually didn't solve the problem. The children still weren't going to school. And it was only after she created the systematic way of looking at what was happening, saying, well, who's really involved? Who are the decision makers? What's the journey? What are the assumptions? Where she actually discovered that the point of friction that was happening is that the children did not have access to clean water. They were getting sick. They couldn't attend school because they were ill, or they had to help with the identification and getting of water from this far off location to bring it back to their families, to help their families survive. So as you can see, by simply sitting down and saying, what is the actual journey? What are all of my assumptions? And intercepting that early, you can start to make different decisions. So by providing clean water, she actually was able to positively impact the ability to educate the children within villages. But it wasn't until the systematic approach. So the top three are, who are you trying to help? Who's involved? What do you think the journey is? Challenge every single assumption. When you challenge every assumption, you can now draw out a linear version of the journey. And you can identify the points of friction that are happening along every point of the way. And when you've identified these points of friction, you can then intercept them and say, what do I do to intercept the points of friction at the earliest possible moment in a way that benefits all of the people I've identified in the relationship, and in a way that uses my skill set and my desire to do good for the world, and in a way that's positive for my company. So you start drawing out these things on the bottom, which are linear journey maps that identify points of interception. Once you've identified and created a solution that actually resolves enough of the issue to create benefit for all of the people involved, you then do what Pixar does, which is a storyboard. Now tell the story in a way that is meaningful and impactful. And if we can move forward, please. So that's a story about Innovation Africa. So in the last 6 months, I've actually used this process incredibly effectively across both a multi-billion-dollar company and startup day one, 2 people. The first was around digital pathology. So in the situation we were at, the large organization was trying to work with people who were building models to automatically detect cancer cells based on pathology scrapes. And as we started to sit down and say, wait a second, why isn't this working? Why aren't we selling? Why aren't we getting anywhere? And we wrote out the relationship map and the real journey map. It turned out that the first point of friction that we were encountering is that in order to train models to detect cancerous cells, you have to have access to hundreds, if not thousands, of existing digital images that are well documented to have a specific set of features, which are known to be cancer. And it's using this set of data that you can actually start to train models. Well, the organization I was working with actually had billions of glass slides, which they could say, well, we know what these glass slides are because we have billions of glass slides and we can identify the different information that's in the patient files. So instead of working on the model, it turned out they actually needed to take 10 steps back and actually work on converting all of the glass slides, associating it with patient metadata, and creating these data sets that they could then sell into people who are experts at building models. This is now a massive market and a massive market opportunity for the company simply because they stepped back, looked at everyone involved, and identified that first point of friction that aligned with the needs of all the people involved and the capabilities of the company. So they went from failing and flailing to massive market opportunity and something that's really good for the world simply by taking a step back and using the systematic compassion capability. I know that we're just low on time. Do you have another minute, Deb, or should I wrap it?
You had a question, systematic compassion. Why don't you answer that and then wrap up?
Sure, let me open up the chat.
It's how this use of systematic compassion is an advancement on the historic empathy and journey maps that have been made up in the past.
Yeah, it's a great question. There are pieces of this that have existed, across a bunch of different disciplines. And what we've done is we took the discipline of everything that's in UX. So a lot of people think of design thinking. That's really a user experience discipline, plus all of the discipline that comes from the product management approach to things. So how do you understand the users? How do you understand what's going on in the market? How do you understand the capabilities of technologies? It takes all of the best practices from product management, the best practices from UX, and the best practices from architectural diagramming, which is that next step of how do you really clearly explain to technologists what needs to be implemented and what those end goals are. And it collapses all of that down into a very concise system of basically 5 different types of maps that can be repeated over and over again. So it's taking the best of everything and really collapsing it down and making it repeatable and systematic, consistent. Hopefully that helps. Okay, so the second one that we recently worked on was about the Inflation Reduction Act, which is really exciting. So the government put $8.8 billion into the market and said for the next 4 years, you can use $8.8 billion to reduce the electricity consumption of all residents and to electrify homes. And the reason this is really important is because if we do this as a country in the United States, we can meet 50% of all of our climate goals, changing absolutely nothing else, simply reducing the electric consumption and electrifying, which means moving people off of dirty fuels being consumed directly in their homes to using the electric grid, which will eventually be converted into more efficient fuels. The challenge was I was brought in to have the conversation, and they were saying, well, how can we market this to more people? And I started looking at it and I started drawing out the relationship map and the journey map. And it became apparent that you can't market this to more people because it's unexplainable. The actual system that was put out was a set of 200 pages of PDF documents from the DOE that is really indescribably hard to read and is just a series of rules. It's not regularly consumable. So what we actually did is we said, well, the reason you're not getting more people to adopt it and more people to adopt your program management software is because nobody understands what the heck is going on. So can we use all of the technology that we understand today? Can we use chatbots and generative AI to actually build a way to interface with this information that's generally consumable by the market and generally consumable by the people who are going to be doing this implementation? So we took all of those PDFs, we took everything we know about electrification, which is a great deal. There are many books on it, and put that all into a chatbot. So we trained or tuned the model for an existing large language model, created a chat interface, and then used that to actually start building ways to implement programs for regular people. So people who aren't reading 200 pages worth of technical manual documentation at a time. And that's what helped bridge the gap between, hey, I've got $8.8 billion that's being unused and is unusable and ununderstandable, to now people are interfacing with this in a way that's really easy to understand, and we can help them build their programs up overnight. So that's another one. And then the last one that we're working on is personalized data wallet, which is how do we enable people like me to collect all of our data around health and finances and personal life and actually start benefiting and selling my data to people who are doing things that are good, who are doing good model research, and allow me to monetize that or donate it if I choose to. So those are the projects that we're working on right now, and we're approaching it with that exact same systematic approach, which makes it easy for us to be very successful very quickly. That's it.
Wow. Thank you so very much, Nicole. We don't have a lot of time for questions, but I do have one question that I think if each of you could maybe do about 1 minute and 30 seconds of response on. When you think about the historic innovations and their primary benefits and harms, okay, as an example, cars were great because transportation, you got to go somewhere faster than walking or taking a horse, right? But then it was, okay, then now you've got accidents that happen on the highway that can cause harm to people. What are innovations that, in your opinion, only have positive outcomes, and how will the benefits balance any potential harms of that innovation? And who would like to go first with that response? And we can unmute you and just let you start talking if you'd like, Vanita.
Well, thank you for the question. I'm not sure that there are any technologies that are purely positive. I couldn't think of any, but I think that the important thing is that we think about what those possible harms are, right? And we build into the way that we build the product, or the way that we administer, or in our case, build the platform and govern the platform, minimizes those opportunities.
Perfect. Thank you, Nicole.
Yeah, I just want to add to that. So it's about being transparent as well, and making sure that what you're doing, you've taken a strategic look and a diverse look at what the potential implications are, and then communicated those implications widely and made purposeful trade-off decisions. That's really the most important part to me, is understanding and making those trade-off decisions in a very conscious way.
Perfect. David.
I'm just going to echo what others have been saying. I think that, benefits and harms come from people, and how we use technology, how we understand each other, how we relate to each other. And I think thinking about how to enable benefits to, balance the harms, I think that we do need to think of appropriate guidelines for technology, and we also need to think about how to educate people to empathize with others, to think about the deeper impacts of technology, and to want to use it for good.
Great. Renee.
I echo everyone else's comment prior to mine. And one thing to add is AI particularly is very much garbage in, garbage out. So being very mindful in terms of how the data is collected and what sort of data is being used to train AI. And now with generative AI and large language model, it's even more important to ensure putting the guardrails around it is something that I think our future innovators should definitely think through. Thank you.
Really good, quick answers. Thank you very much. There's some great chat and commentary going on out on the chat window. We'll definitely include some of those and several really good links in there as well in our white paper that we'll be publishing shortly after the conclusion of the session today. I do again want to thank all the panelists, Utpal, Michelle, Jim, everyone who joined on the call and participated today and added comments. I will now turn it back over to Michelle to wrap us up, if you will, please. Thank you all again. Great job.
And thank you, Deb, for fantastic work pulling this all together. Let's pull this back up. And thank you. Fascinating conversation, great examples, panelists. You are all just inspiring and informative. Thank you. And thank everybody who took the time to patch in today and join us for powering this Discovery Summit with your questions and your comments and your participation. We appreciate it. All of our speakers will be receiving ISSIP digital credentials for helping to advance service innovation sharing, and thinking. The slides will be available on SlideShare and the recording on ISSIP YouTube. And there will be an email sent out to everyone who has registered so that you will have easy access to those things. And we encourage you to stay engaged with us. October is a big month for ISSIP. We vote for our vice president. Deb Stokes will be shifting into the presidency next year, and we need a vice president. So we have 3 very strong candidates. That announcement will be coming out shortly. And we vote over the course of October. All members are eligible to vote. And you saw in the chat, hopefully from Terry Griffith, there was a call for nominations for Service Innovation Excellence Awards for 2024. Those nominations are open now. through the end of the year. And then the judging happens in January, February, we announce in the spring. Do follow us on LinkedIn. I believe there will be a link there in the chat to follow us, and that's how to stay up with the many, many, many things that are going on. And look for that white paper coming out in the fourth quarter. So thank you all. We look forward to seeing you at the next interchange. Goodbye.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.